Okay, guys, I think we are supposed to start.
Yeah, we're here. I can see us. Hello, good morning, everybody. I can see from the YouTube channel that there are some interesting things going on. That seems to be better. Hi. So I am Andy Danson. I am the head of the international gambling practice at Bird&Bird. If you don't know us, we're an international law firm with 30 offices around the world. Just a few weeks ago, I have to say I didn't really expect to be broadcasting to an audience from my 9-year-old's bedroom, but here we are. So forgive me if I'm interrupted by a small child at any time. I guess definitely a new experience for most of us. I hope wherever you are that you are safe and well and staying sane. Happy to say that today I'm joined by my colleagues who you can all see. We have Karin Söderberg from Sweden. We've got Vojtěch Chloupek from the Czech Republic. Piotr Dynowski from Poland.
Hi.
And Gabor Helembai from Hungary.
Hi.
So today we are going to give you a little bit of an international gambling roundup using the UK as something of a point of comparison for what's going on in Sweden, Czech Republic, Poland and Hungary. We'll be focusing not just on what's happening from a regulatory point of view, but also what operators might want to be thinking about in terms of preparing for and adapting to what's coming. Obviously, at a time like this, we can't fail to mention the impact of coronavirus on the industry, and I think it is interesting to see what impact that is having from a regulatory point of view. So we've seen, for example, in Spain and Portugal recently, additional restrictions on the gambling sector, particularly during this period of self-isolation in order to protect consumers, whereas in some jurisdictions we've had completely the opposite approach. So I was reading that in Colombia they are actually relaxing regulatory restrictions on operators to help them through these difficult times. Now that would be an interesting approach to adopt in Europe. So Steve has already given us a UK update, and so I don't want to dwell with too much focus on the UK because you've already had that. I think just to summarise what's going on, though, we've obviously had a pretty sustained anti-gambling campaign in the national press. We have hostility towards the gambling sector in Parliament. We've had a dramatic increase in Gambling Commission enforcement. We've had the shift that Steve was talking about from evidence-based policy making to a public health approach, which means a more precautionary approach to policy making in the sector. We have a formal review of the Gambling Act coming up, which will lead to an inevitable tightening of regulation. Steve focused rightly on issues of affordability. I think we could see online stake limits, a mandatory problem gambling levy. There will certainly be, and the industry is already working with the Gambling Commission to look at curbs on VIP programs and responsible game design. There will be, I'm sure, more restrictions around advertising, gambling in the UK, and not just a continuation of the huge fines that we're seeing from the Gambling Commission, but also I think more and more risk of licenses being revoked and suspended, not just at an organisational level, but also at an individual personal management licence level. I think COVID-19 provides additional threats. I mean, certain opportunities, but I think overwhelmingly threats for the industry in the UK and elsewhere. I mean, obviously there are clear commercial threats in respect of retail networks and betting operators generally. Obviously, with the lack of sport, it is a huge challenge that many of you will be feeling. at the moment. From a regulatory point of view, I think one of the threats is that if there are temporary restrictions brought in during this period of self-isolation for consumer protection purposes, then will those be relaxed afterwards, or will they become the norm? And of course, what we have is not just a public health emergency at the moment with COVID-19, but also a very serious economic situation. And will governments need to be raising more taxes in the future? And of course, as we know, the gambling industry is always a relatively easy target from a political point of view in that regard. But that is enough of the largely bad news for the industry from the UK. Let's find out what's going on elsewhere in the world. So I'll start with Karin in Sweden. So obviously a lot has happened in Sweden in the last 18 months or so from a regulatory point of view. So tell us a bit more about that, and what is likely to be the focus of the SGA in Sweden in the next year.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Karin, and I work as a senior associate in Bird&Bird Stockholm office. So as regards Sweden, I can see from the SGA operational plan for 2020 that a focus area will be responsible gambling and the so-called duty of care. And the duty of care includes different measures to prevent problem gambling, such as monitoring player behavior, take any actions if needed. For example, restrict the possibilities to gamble for a player, etc. And also to provide different tools to the players in order to keep track of the gambling. So up until now, it has been a bit unclear what the duty of care actually includes. So as far as I'm aware, it will be a focus for the SGA to clarify this during 2020. And in order to get a better picture of how the operators work with the duty of care, the SGA actually requested in the beginning of this year that all the operators which has a Swedish license to submit their duty of care action plan. It is a legal requirement to have this plan in place. So as a next step, the SGA will now go through all these plans and review what the focus areas should be, and also if there is any need to take any specific actions with regard to any certain operators with respect to the duty of care. So the SGA has expressed that there is a quite extensive need to clarify what is actually within the scope of duty of care. So hopefully that will become more clear during 2020. Also, as I understand, the SGA will have as a focus during this upcoming year to review how the operators are handling the self-exclusion registry and the requirement to be able to self-exclude. And this could also be said to be part of the duty of care. And as far as I'm aware, one of the other focus areas will be AML. The SGA is actually stating in this operational plan for 2020 that the SGA will request information from operators how they're handling their AML issues. The SGA is planning on doing on-site visits. So yeah, it can be mentioned that the SGA actually recently published their own risk assessment, where they are talking about risk and threats with respect to different types of gambling. So that could be interesting to take a look at and compare to the operator's own risk assessments, because this will be an area which will be in focus during this year. So, and other than that, as you probably are aware, during the last summer, the Swedish Consumer Agency made an audit of the operators' gambling marketing, and this resulted in a report. And it seems like the consumer agency is now following up this report to see if the operators are actually if they have adapted to the recommendations within the report. And in the cases where there hasn't been any adoptions, there has been supervisory matters. So there is also a focus on the marketing side during 2020. And as regards to consumer agency, I believe that it was already in 2019 talks about that there will be a review of the terms and conditions, the operators' terms and conditions. So I think that is something that might happen during 2020 as well. And I think it will be relevant both for EULAs and for specific terms and conditions for bonus offers and such. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Karin. I think that's interesting. A lot of what the SGA seems to be looking to doing this year is quite similar to what the Gambling Commission is currently doing and has been doing over the last few years. Certainly that sort of coming in and doing hands-on investigations. The investigation into terms and conditions is something that operators in the UK went through a few years ago, where our Competition and Markets Authority, along with the Gambling Commission, did a thorough investigation there, which led to a number of changes. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Have you got any thoughts on how operators should be preparing for what's coming?
Well, my recommendation would be to actually make sure that all of the procedures works in practice, meaning that the duty of care procedures and actions are properly implemented, that it's not only within the duty of care action plan, but it actually works. And also review the marketing, make sure that it is compliant, stay up, continue to be updated within this area, because I think this is an area which will be revisited many times by the consumer agency. So basically just make sure that everything which you're as an operator stating that you're doing on paper, just make sure it also works in practice. Yeah, that's my recommendation going forward for 2020.
Great. Thanks, Karin. And I should just say that anyone wanting to ask questions, I think given the nature of the online conference, what we'll do is take questions at the end. So if you have any questions throughout, please do send them through, and we'll try and pick them up at the end. So if you've got anything for Karin or me, let us know. We will now, I think, move on to Vojtěch in the Czech Republic. So obviously, I think from our perspective, since the Czech gambling laws changed in 2017, there's been quite a period of disappointment, I think, for international online gambling operators. Vojtěch, have there been any developments recently that suggest that the regulator's approach might be changing at all?
Not really, Andy. Basically, the situation remains to be the same. There was a personal change in the department of the gambling department at the Ministry of Finance. They have a new head since the last year, but there hasn't been any change practically with respect to the approach to issuing licensing or generally to the regulation. There is still only a handful of online licenses issued, mainly to the domestic incumbents, very few to the international operators, because although the new law that you mentioned looks quite okay on paper, there is still lots of discretion for the regulator, for the ministry, to assess applications for the licenses, and they really have been very restrictive over the years. So in that respect, the situation is still pretty much the same. on the sort of regulatory side, the news over the last few months or over the last year have been the adoption of the new reporting regulation. So basically, the system where the operators are transmitting various data to the regulator, that's already been in place. It's working. And also the Czech regulator will be putting in live the envisaged system of sort of central system of banned players. So that's supposed to be rolled out towards this year end. What we've seen basically is that while the regulation is, or there hasn't been many sort of changes in the regulation or very good news with respect to issuing new licenses, there has been sort of lack of enforcement at the same time. So in a way, the regulator is taking it relatively easy on those who have the licenses. Of course, those who don't, those who are sort of on the more reputable operator category, they basically pulled out of the market, and arguably, basically to confirm what Steve was saying before, I think that those hardcore players basically moved to the black market because basically there isn't any alternative. Probably the last thing that's somehow in the pipeline is some sort of alleviation to the AML regulation. So there is a draft law which would basically alleviate the face-to-face client recognition or face-to-face AML, which of course is quite advantageous for the local players, but not so good for the foreign online operators. So we'll see whether that comes to life. If it does, it will probably not be before the end of the year. So that's a regulatory summary from the Czech Republic.
Thanks, Vojtěch. And that's interesting what you mentioned there about growth of the black market as a result of the Czech gambling laws and the restrictive nature of them. I mean, just thinking about what Steve was saying earlier about the risks of that happening in the UK, I think are very relevant for policymakers to be considering. I know that gambling taxes in the Czech Republic have increased recently. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that might affect the market?
Sure, that was actually the biggest news and the most discussed topic in the industry over the past months, because basically the Czech government decided or wanted to raise gambling tax pretty much across the board as part of a sort of more general hike in taxes that addressed the sort of the addictive products or addictive industry. So it was basically part of this package that would raise taxes for tobacco, alcohol products, as well as gambling. And as I said, the original plan of the Ministry of Finance was to raise the taxes pretty much for all games. Well, the result is that basically only the tax on lotteries was changed from 23% to 35%. And arguably, lotteries are not the most addictive of all the sort of possible gambling activities. And that, of course, affected a lot the lottery businesses, which had to rewrite their business plans, maybe abandon some products that they had in the pipeline, because, of course, that was quite a big increase in tax. That was a part of this package was also introduction of an income tax on winnings, because before there was basically no tax on winnings. Now there is a 15% tax on winnings above 1 million Czech crowns threshold. So these have been the news. Of course, so far only the lottery market was affected, but now with the COVID-19 situation, even though I don't have the crystal ball, I think that the next natural step for the government will be to increase tax also on sportsbook, e-casino, all the other games that were not passed this time. But surely the government will be looking at where to get money to basically to cover the downturn that I think everyone expects. So So I guess that's probably will be what's going to happen, which makes really the Czech market really uninviting to foreign operators, of course, because not only the regulation is very strict and it's very difficult at the moment to get the license, but with those tax hikes, it doesn't make much sense to enter the market from business perspective either.
No, understood. So thank you very much for that, Wojciech. Let's move over to Poland now and Piotr. So again, at a similar time to the Czech Republic, I know that Poland introduced pretty significant measures to keep unlicensed operators off the market. So we've had blacklisting and payment blocking mechanisms. Piotr, how have those been working so far?
Yeah, so indeed, as you noted, in 2017 we had this major reform, which was mainly aimed at keeping unlicensed operators off the Polish market by introducing domain blocking and payment blocking mechanism, but also by expanding the state monopoly to redirect the stream from the black market into state-controlled companies in the online gambling. So now we have the only licensed online casino in Poland, which is run by the state monopoly. Well, apparently, based on the results both published by the license operators and the government, the payment blocking and domain blacklisting mechanism seems to work relatively well. The revenues of the license operators have increased very steeply in the recent 2 years, basically doubling the numbers. Also, the results published by the government for the state-owned online casino seem to be quite promising, and some data which is available says that the black market share in Poland has decreased from about 80% that we used to have in the past to about 50-60% at the moment. So it is still reasonably high, but you can see a significant cut to what we used to have. Of course, there are and there were some flaws with these mechanisms. And there was a report issued by the Supreme Audit Office of Poland last year, also on the blacklisting mechanism, and certain improvements were suggested. Therefore, the Polish Ministry of Finance already last year prepared a draft new bill to the customs regulation, not the Gambling Games Act as such, but to the customs regulation, where the part of it was also amendment to the blacklisting mechanism in Poland, aimed at actually improving the mechanism. So currently, the domains that can be blacklisted are the domains which are addressed to the Polish audience, either by being available in Polish language or being advertised in Poland, or otherwise where the link can be found. The new proposed bill says about website being available in Poland. So now basically a website in any kind of language, including, I don't know, Indonesian, and not being really promoted or specifically targeted at the Polish audience, could potentially be blacklisted if only a Polish player is would be technically able to access that sort of site and play. And there are also some procedural changes because currently all the decisions on blacklisting need to be formally approved by the Minister of Finance. The new bill proposes that it will be actually delegated to the heads of the local and regional tax offices, so it will make the procedures way quicker, even now you have basically a couple of dozen new domains blacklisted every 2 weeks, and we already have well over 10,000 domains blacklisted in the Polish register. Of course, we'll see how that will proceed, because as I said, that new bill was already prepared last year and actually was struck down because we had parliamentary elections in fall last year. And in Poland, we have this rule of discontinuation of the works of the parliament. So in theory, all the legal acts which were not processed by the parliament are abandoned by the new parliament. But the new parliament decided to take this bill on their legislative works list as well. So it has a new number, but will be continued. But it's hard to say when it will happen now, taking into consideration the current situation and that there are probably some other legislative priorities in the pipeline first. But similarly to what Wojciech has said, I mean, surely there's a lot of public spending currently going on in all the countries hit by coronavirus. So I'm sure the Polish government would also be interested in looking for the potential sources of revenue to cover those costs. So if they can generate any extra money from the gambling industry, they would be happy to do that.
Thanks, Piotr. Yeah, that certainly seems to be something of a theme. I also thought it was interesting that even with 10,000 sites on the blacklist and payment blocking mechanisms, you still have a 50 to 60% channelization to the black market. So I think that's a really interesting statistic. I mean, in terms of the operators who are licensed in Poland, what are they doing at the moment to keep their offers exciting, particularly given the lack of sport to bet on at the minute?
Yeah, so well, I guess similarly to other markets, primarily all the license operators, and in Poland that means basically betting operators are of course trying to cover the loss they make on not being able to bet on real sports events, is to move and improve their offer on all kinds of esports and virtual sports events. So some operators have launched virtual league betting, where you actually bet on simulated matches of La Liga, the Spanish La Liga, or Premiership, which are basically simulated on the basis of the results of the last 50 real matches from the league prior to cessation of the matches due to coronavirus. Of course, you see a lot of new offers related to esports and other virtual events. You see a lot of new products on betting on lots of various events, like results of the presidential elections that we have in Poland this year, weather, exchange rates, and anything you can think of. But also one very fresh and gaining in popularity product that you can see in Poland is actually offering betting on virtual card games. So a couple of operators already launch in Poland an option with the product where you can bet actually on the result of simulated card game, being poker, baccarat, or war, which is quite controversial, taking into consideration that those card games that you bet on are in fact games of chance that are heavily regulated on the Polish market. So it could raise doubts as to whether this sort of betting could be to some extent interpreted as an attempt actually to circumvent the regulations on prohibition of that sort of online gambling for private operators. But surprisingly, and there were already some questions raised in this regard by the industry to the regulator. Regulator seems to be quite fine with that new offering. So more and more operators are actually now also making it a part of their offers.
Thanks very much, Piotr. It is interesting, I think, to see how times like this are driving innovation. So amongst all of the bad news that we're hearing from a regulatory and economic perspective, the idea of, I mean, particularly, I guess, if you are in virtual sports, or from a Polish perspective, innovative betting products like betting on casino games is a potential area of growth, and as is esports betting, I'm certain. And so I think it is one thing, hopefully slightly more positive to take away, that you know, as with all difficult times, it does drive innovation, and that's something that I know many in the industry are looking at the moment. So that is an update from Poland. We'll move now to Gabor in Hungary, who's been sat very patiently there. So Gabor, how have the Hungarian regulations evolved over the last few years compared to other jurisdictions?
Yes, thanks, Andy. So Hungary is exceptional, and to be honest, does not really fit to this group of jurisdiction we were talking about, because in the last 6 years, the Hungarian regulation was not really developed or evolved. Back then, in 2014, the legislator took a very conservative and strict approach when regulated the gambling, and especially the online gambling sector. Since then, only minor amendments regarding the fine-tuning and updating of the AML rules, the KYC rules, or the gaming protection rules has been implemented. Back then, there was a non-liberalized market established, meaning that the local operators were really preferred. It means practically that only those operators can run a business in Hungary who gain a concession right from the Hungarian state. Concession right can be awarded by means of a public tender or by a discretional decision of the finance minister. And in practice, not one public tender was completed, and all the available 11 concession rights were distributed by the finance minister, which was not really a transparent way, at least according to the European Court of Justice. But let's talk about it later. That's it. So, state monopoly was established for online sports betting and online horse race betting. So only the fully state-owned gambling organizer can pursue this activity. And on the other hand, only those operators can run an online casino who already has a concession right for land-based casinos. So these two types of operations are closely connected, just like in Belgium. This makes the Hungarian concessionaires very comfortable position. So maybe that's why the first online casino was only launched in 2018, and currently only 3 online casinos are running in Hungary. However, it was coded by the system that international operators will challenge this system sooner or later, because after 2014, the Hungarian Gambling Supervisory Authority started to chase the foreign operators having no license in Hungary, started to block them, put them on a blacklist, impose fining on them, and these administrative decisions were challenged by certain foreign operators in front of the Hungarian courts. And the Hungarian courts had the courage to refer certain questions to the European Court of Justice, because in the meanwhile, they revealed that certain questions are closely connected to the European law, and especially the principle of free movement of services within the EU. So after 2 years of litigations, the ECJ decided and made two landmark decisions, one in the Unibet case and one in the Sporting Odds case, where they finally stipulated that the Hungarian regulation is in conflict with the EU law, and more importantly, the sanctions imposed by the Hungarian authority cannot be applied against these foreign operators. So basically, these two landmark decisions resulted in the huge grey market developed in Hungary in the recent years. And there's a somewhat awkward situation that none of the parties interested in the situation were encouraged to change the status quo, because the Hungarian operators were super busy with setting up their first business, online business. So they just, I think, they simply didn't have the resources to lobby against the foreign operators. The foreign operators were obviously really happy about this because they can operate in Hungary without paying any tax. The state-owned gambling organizer was also really happy because they produced really nice numbers in terms of P&L. Since 2014, they almost doubled the revenue. So both the management and the owner, the Hungarian state, were happy. And finally, the Hungarian state, on the one hand, for political reasons, it was a good argumentation for the conservative government to argue against the EU and pose themselves as the protector of the Hungarian interest against foreign operators and the EU. And on the other hand, the Hungarian state budget is in a good shape. As all of you know, Hungary was one of the eminent states within the EU. Last year produced the highest GDP growth. So I think simply the Hungarian state does not really want it to deal with such kind of, say, small amount of taxes.
And thanks, Gabor. So the European Court of Justice landmark decisions, it sounds like the resultant explosion of a grey market in Hungary. Is that notwithstanding that I guess the current good times in Hungary, at least pre-COVID-19, but is that likely to have an impact on Hungarian law? I mean, obviously, Sweden a number of years ago was on the wrong end of a number of European decisions, and that led to a complete overhaul of gambling law in Sweden. Do you see anything like that at all coming down the line in Hungary?
Yes, sure. So coronavirus crisis hit the Hungarian market as well. The state gambling organizer suffers under the COVID-19 restrictions pretty much. What we see from the numbers, the first numbers, for example, 20% decrease in lottery games, 70% decrease in sports betting. So the numbers are not so encouraging that it was a month ago, and also the Hungarian budget, state budget, will be no more in good shape. I mean, needs more and more income. So I think it would be a reasonable step to introduce a very appropriate regulation of the online gaming sector, whereby foreign operators could get a license in Hungary and pay taxes to the Hungarian budget. So due to the short-term bad news, I think we can be optimistic that this is the right time and right place to introduce a new state-of-the-art regulation in Hungary.
And no, I think it's very nice to finish that roundup with some potential good news. Let's I won't necessarily hold my breath, but I'll certainly be crossing my fingers for that one. So I think some of the themes that we identified there, I mean, with the exception of Hungary, I think we're looking at a picture of tightening regulation. I think we're looking at a picture of potentially increased tax, but what with potential innovations, technical and game and product innovations brought about by partly by COVID-19, and also the potential for at least in Hungary, and who knows, perhaps elsewhere, something of an opening up.
Okay, yeah. So there's one question regarding if we could comment a bit more on the SGA's approach to responsible gambling. And well, one comment is that well, it's quite unclear what constitutes responsible gambling and the duty of care. And also, I think that the SGA is aware that it's unclear. And I think the ambition when they started to collect all these responsible gambling action plans was to kind of decide what the operators should do, get a picture of what they're actually not doing, and kind of scope out what should be within the duty of care. Because I agree, it's very hard to tell if you as an operator are doing the right thing or not, since it's very fluffy. But hopefully this whole exercise with collecting the action plans, with taking some more hands-on measures, and maybe also clarify some of the regulations which has been drafted by the SGA, might clarify and get give the operators a better picture of what is actually expected. Because as far as I'm aware, the only thing which is clear now is that, well, you have to have some tools to control gambling. You have to enable for the players to set time limits, stake limits, etc., and for the players to be able to exclude. But that's pretty much the only thing with it which is straightforward. So well, hopefully all of this work which is going to be done and which is highly prioritized during 2020 will make it a bit easier to actually know if you're compliant or not. So yeah, comment there.
I don't know if people can hear me and if I'm working again, but
Hey.
Yeah, hopefully I am. Does anyone else have any other questions? Thank you, Karin. Well, we are pretty much at 11:35, which is the end of our appointed time. So if there are no further questions, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.